Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all today to an online debate named 30 Years of the Visegrad Group. My name is Adél Kovács, and I will be moderating today's debate organized by the Institute for Politics and Society. Since 1991, the Visegrad Group plays an influential and crucial role in the Central European region. Throughout 30 years of cooperation between Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland, the V4 states became members of NATO and the European Union. And these were essential milestones during the post-socialist transformation. Joint cultural, economic, and infrastructural actions contributed to a good neighborhood. However, the member states are frequently divided over important political and social issues. How can member states bridge the political divide and find a common understanding of these issues? Does V4 have the same relevance as it had 30 years ago? How can the member states further proceed with their partnership? And to help our thinking on all these questions, I'm delighted to welcome our speakers. Katalin Cseh, member of the European Parliament from Hungary, Ondřej Kovařík, member of Parliament from the Czech Republic, Jozo Perič, chief analyst from Capital Panda, Rastislav Kačer, ambassador of Slovakia to the Czech Republic, and Wojciech Przybylski, editor-in-chief of Visegrad Insight and president of the board at the Respublika Foundation. Welcome. Before we get into the panel discussion, this event is being recorded and it will be shared on social media on the IPPS Facebook page. I would like to encourage everyone watching us online to send us your questions as we go in the comment section. And now I would like to start a discussion, and let me ask Ambassador Kačer first. Could you please tell us how relevant the Visegrad Group is nowadays, and does it have the same relevance as it had 30 years ago?
Well, it's not a static world we are living in, and in the last 30 years, many things changed. The whole world's changed, all the region changed. And here I would say thanks to God, it's changed. Because when I would recall that 1991, when Visegrad was created still as a V3, not a V4, this was a place which was very much lagging behind its current Western allies. We were very much hoping and aspiring to reintegrate to the world which we felt instinctively we are culturally part of. And that is the world of so-called political West, because countries of Poland, then Czechoslovakia and Hungary, we were part of that concept of Latin political West for 1,000 years. I always kept saying when Saint Stephen married Giselle of Bavaria, we chose the West. We chose the Vatican. We chose the culture of Western Europe, which became our destiny for 1,000 years. We were torn of this for 40 years by a series of communist coups, but this was the time 30 years ago when we aspired to return back. And Visegrad was one of the projects which we felt we need to do, but we were always also inspired by friends in the United States, in Germany, in other parts of that time, European Union and NATO, telling us, you know, look, you need to prove that you can cooperate. You need to prove that you are able to overcome the old historical mythology and divisions, which is sometimes among you, some level of bitterness, and we did it. So Visegrad proved that was a useful institution, and it still plays the role as useful institution to make us stronger, more relevant, and better part of the world, which we are now legally, and we were only aspiring, and now we are legally. So we are member of EU, we are member of NATO, we are sitting at the table, we are shaping the decisions, and Visegrad here is a good tool. We don't agree always. We never agreed always, no frustration in that. It's perfectly fine. On many areas we agree, but Visegrad proven to be a good tool for which was intended to be.
Thank you. And based on what Mr. Kačer said, I would like to ask Mr. Perič, could you please elaborate on the economic transition in the V4 countries throughout 30 years? And could you please tell us what were the most important events in the transition?
Hi. Well, yes, of course, but I mean, like Ambassador Ketcher said, basically the most important event is the sole decision to move from a planned to a market economy. As we all agreed, at that time it was Bielecki in Poland. So later on, it was led with also Bokoš in Hungary, and also the people in Czechoslovakia around Václav Havel. So due to change in the way of the economy, how it's functioning, and initial shock after this change from the planned to market economy, a lot of people, of course, went into exile out of these countries, mainly in Germany, France, and England. Of course, a lot of them went into the USA. But it was simply not so much because there was simply not so much work for an extremely large number of people in the labor market. However, this immigration later on enabled a better connection with the world because at first they educated themselves on the foreign universities, but later on, when the home countries needed the know-how, this immigration, first and second generation, actually helped the local network to establish and to expand. And of course, when we check the last 30 years, the second point was entering into the European Union. And later on, regarding from the economic point of view, these countries didn't have so big crisis when we compare to the years between 2007 and 2008, like some other countries. But ground point is the big change what happened in 1991 from basically planned to a market economy.
And now, moving on from the past, I would like to continue with current events happening in the Visegrad region. Mr. Kovařík, could you please talk about the role of the V4 cooperation in the EU's perspective?
Thank you, and good afternoon to all. I would definitely agree with the previous speakers on many points. In terms of the EU perspective, and I think it was mentioned here as well, it was one of the common ambition for the V4 country at the very beginning of the formation of that platform or the cooperation group to sort of strive and try to reach, as Ambassador Ketcher denominated, the political West. But I think basically a family of democratic states in Europe. And I think basically we saw from the very beginning of V4 this shared ambition to integrate in international organizations. In 1991, there was a partnership in transition signed between the V4 countries and OECD, for instance, and there was an accession later on in the 90s to OECD, a very important moment. We discussed here also the moment when the countries gradually joined the NATO, and I think it was sort of on top of it the common accession of V4 countries to European Union. I think in terms of the current situation and cooperation of the V4, it has very much changed from, let's say, the regional cooperation at the very beginning to cooperation that is, to a certain extent, much more European than it was before. Also because of the countries' shared position within the European structures. So what we can see. We could see in the past was discussing regional topics, or also discussion in the V4 Plus format, where the countries invited other partners such as Ukraine, such as Austria, such as Germany, but also countries such as Japan. In order to sort of enlarge the cooperation. But what we can see now, there's a lot of debates among the leaders and the representatives of the V4 countries discussing European issues in terms of better coordination, better cooperation. on those issues that all the countries share. This is, I think, there is this shift from, let's say, typical regional cooperation to a more European one. We see basically before all leaders meeting on the European Council level, we see a coordination of the V4 format. The European issues are very basically regularly on the agenda of V4 meetings, be it on the level of presidents, be it on the level of prime ministers, be it on the level of respective ministers. So we can see that this is now an integral part of V4 cooperation. And I think it is to a certain extent a rational approach, because obviously the European Union is also about creating alliances between countries that are like-minded on some topics. We see other formats in the European Union, North Baltic aid. We see Benelux countries. We see countries friends of cohesion. We saw last year, for example, frugal states. So there are these alliances being built on a regular basis, and I'm pretty sure that V4 is actually one of those alliances that is currently working in Europe.
Thank you. And as a follow-up question, how does the Visegrad Group approach the recovery fund of the EU?
Well, I think, we have, in terms of recovery fund, I think we need to see two perspectives. First of all, it's the European general regulatory framework. So we have a recovery and resilience facility that is actually sort of requiring certain structure and certain priorities on which the respective countries should focus when designing the national recovery plans. We have certain targets. For example, there is a target saying that at least 37% of the commitments in national recovery plans should contribute to climate change policies. At least 20% should contribute to further digitalization of economies and etc. So, I mean, this is something that is common for all the member states, including the V4 countries. And this is, I think, the very basics of the work that I would assume all the governments had to start with. But then, obviously, there is this national approach where national stakeholders, including governments, sort of assess the need and the needs and the opportunities that can be actually included in national recovery plans in order to boost the economy after the COVID pandemic. And I think here, then, if the procedure is quite similar in the countries, the content itself varies, I think, according the priorities of respective governments. But in general, I think the main approach is quite similar. Obviously, also the countries will benefit from different amounts, which I think is a very important thing to mention. We see, for example, quite an important support going to Poland, also as a big country. Some lower amounts going to small countries such as Czech Republic and Slovakia, for instance. And I think this is also a defining moment for governments to say on which type of actions and which type of policies the money from the recovery plan should be spent the best.
Thank you. And continuing with this topic, I would like to turn to Ms. Che, as a trained medical professional. What are your thoughts on the Visegrad countries' epidemic management? And has the relationship of the V4 countries improved or deteriorated during the pandemic? How do you see it?
Well, thank you for this question. And well, I suppose the pandemic has put a great strain on the global economy and the global healthcare system all over the world. And of course, the V4 are no examples. And national strategies differed very greatly. I personally had the opportunity to volunteer at the ER department of a Budapest hospital, and I managed to see here firsthand what kind of devastating effects it might have if a certain government neglects healthcare reforms for a decade. But obviously, these challenges were further intensified by the approaches of governments, mostly during the first wave, but also afterwards, throughout their actions to reject European cooperation and turning inwards and only choosing the nationalistic approach. I think we all remember the sight of the queues of lorries at the Hungarian border, for instance. And then frankly, I could never imagine that this would be a sight I ever witnessed in my life. And also we saw very, very unfortunate cases as well when, for instance, shipments of masks and PPEs meant for one European country was, well, stopped at the airport of another. So I think the first wave was certainly not a good show of European solidarity. But later on, I think we managed to leverage our V4 cooperation with, for instance, with the vaccine sharing when Hungary donated vaccines to the Czech Republic. I think that was a great move. There was a transfer of knowledge to a great extent, I'm quite sure, at the medical level. From what I hear of doctors, it happened. But let me just touch upon another thing, which is COVID related a bit, but also links back to what Mr. Kovarik said before, which is the economic aspects of the pandemic and the recovery. And if we look at how certain Visegrad countries perceived this truly historic European effort, I think Andrei was very, very polite here. Because of course, every national government chose their own strategy on how to spend the money. But let's not forget how it all began. A few months ago, Hungary and Poland threatened to veto the entire recovery package over their concerns that a certain rule of law conditionality would be approved. And then nobody really thought about what will happen to the Czech businesses or what will happen to the Slovak unemployed. They only thought about their own very, very limited and short-sighted national interests. And this is where, you know, the key of the challenges for the future lie, I believe, because for a bloc to have a future, it's quite imperative to have common goals and a common strategy. And from what I perceive right now, when I look at the V4, is that I see a bloc full of potential that was born out of our joint effort to belong to the West and to integrate into Europe, which is now split into half by two illiberal governments who want to turn the wheel of history back and work against European values and against European integrity, and two countries who are, like, let's say, more moderated in many cases and who don't perceive their EU membership's sole goal to destroy joint efforts in order to fight for their imaginary wars back home. And this is a wedge. Let me just give one more example here. And I know I diverted far away from your question, but I think there are very big underlyings here. For instance, foreign policy. And if we talk about Visegrad cooperation in recent months, there was this really, really horrible case when after the explosion in the Czech Republic, Hungary was the only European country that refused to expel Russian diplomats. So how can you talk about V4 cooperation and solidarity after Mr. Orban's relationships with Mr. Putin and all the shady and classified financial dealings they have with Russia overrides the very, very legitimate joint security interests of the European Union and of the inborn solidarity they should feel towards their V4 partners. So, I think if you think about the future, this is also something we have to address. And how can the V4 act sustainably in the long run if these wedges run deeper and deeper? This would be a shame, really, because the potential in this cooperation is huge. But right now, certain leaders only work for their own national interests, not for the interests of the V4, and certainly not for the interests of the European Union.
Thank you. And Mr. already touched upon this issue, and I would like to turn to Mr. Przybylski. So do you think the V4 countries, how can they overcome internal conflicts if there are any, and actually there are internal conflicts?
Well, I don't notice any hot conflict between V4s. There are disagreements, there are differences of perspectives, but I will look back especially that we're debating the 30 years of the V4 and see the intensity of relations only increased over that time. And that's true, that currently there are even two groups within V4 of countries that think differently about how this group should go about further, or even if it should go about further. But historically, there might have been some conflicts in the past. We have seen Slovakia not being even part of the group initially because of the founding problem that was there with the government of Mr. Mecsáš, which was simply not meeting the requirements of democratic security. The V4 is about setting our region safe, secure, and prosperous for the future. At that time, this particular government was not very helpful, but the doors were open, of course. And Slovakia not only caught up with the speeds the other three were on, but in many ways it overtook in terms of, for instance, European integration. I mean, we have to know and we have to recognize that among V4, Slovakia is today more integrated than the others, especially because of the Eurozone. Not to mention some other issues on the democratic backsliding, for instance. The past conflicts or the potential of conflicts in the region that were there before even Visegrad Group existed were mitigated because of the V4. If you think about the tensions between neighbors in the grouping, if you think about different disagreements there were in the past, Visegrad Group only enabled them to be moderated. I mean, I'm thinking again, Slovakia, Hungary, for instance, but also you can imagine how many more between Poles and Czechs disagreements could arise should we not have the forum, which is not only a European forum, it is predominantly an internal regional forum for managing conversations and policies and build up cohesion within the group. So I think the V4 is not stimulating conflicts. And if someone, and we know some politicians, we have mentioned Viktor Orban here, that looks to the potential of using V4 as a platform to, to have a conflict with the other partners in the EU, I think this is not the way for the V4, and this is not acceptable.
Thank you. And I would like to ask the speakers if you would like to touch upon or hop on any other thoughts the others mentioned, then please feel free to do so. And yes, please.
Mic is on. Okay. Briefly, because it's a couple of things where I absolutely agree. First of all, Visegrad is just an informal grouping. This is not a set, firm structure. We got nothing together which would do or which would resemble as the organization. For all of us, this is one of the informal settings in which we work in. For Slovakia, it's additional format of Slavko Free, where the Czechs and Austrians work, and for many reasons during this COVID crisis, it's been very active, and we used it quite frequently in the last year. So we should stress that Visegrad often gets kind of a publicly overrated image. If it was something which was firmly set structure, and we need to clarify that this is only an informal grouping, which to Slovakia serves its interest or it serves its purpose when it's aimed at making us within the EU stronger and better partner. For us, if V4 should turn as a tool where we would beat on the head of those in Brussels or portray that Central Europe is a kind of a unique preservation of a different way of life than the mainstream of Brussels, that is not the V4 we like and we accept. That I should stress right away. And of course, we many times didn't agree on foreign policy. You're absolutely right. On this Vrbětice case in the Czech Republic, there were clear fractures and divisions. But before that, I would even stress Ukraine. Hungary was blocking on every possible occasion Ukraine-NATO dialogue, and we were mad about that. And we made it clear many times. But what we have here in the region and what we said before, and I always apply, and Katalin knows, we were already on the debate of American Enterprise Institute, where I was quite critical, and then I was heavily beaten on my head by your guys from Budapest, you could imagine. So I have to behave now, but to us, what we agreed is not to wash our dirty linens in front of the public. So if we have more serious issues of disagreement, put it in this way, we don't really want to do it shouting at each other, but do it in the civilized way. And there are things of disagreement which we don't want to show off. Why? This is a number of other families within the group of EU. This is not important, but we should not overrate. We should not definitely overrate as if V4 was something as a standalone project or anything as a regional alternative. It's not at all. We have this with Poland, which was often seen as a Pilsudski renewal, this Trimare, which is not, it's another regional institute, which is to strengthen South-North dialogue and improve the critical infrastructure running down South-North, etc., etc. So it's a whole array of sometimes more, sometimes less successful things. But for Slovakia, definitely, the EU, it's something which matters deeply. We want to be, we are, as it was mentioned, member of Eurozone. We care about EU integration. And one last thing, which I think Katalin was absolutely right, and I like the point, which was about pandemic management. This was a renewal of nationalistic approach, and I hated that. And if there is the end lesson on which we should look when pandemic is, I'm hoping very much coming to the end, is that we don't need less EU, because closing those borders between Slovakia and Hungary, even Czech Republic and Slovakia, this was so horrible. This was such a shame, because we got, and I feel it now as the ambassador, I got 250,000 Slovaks living here in the Czech Republic. And for them, it's a daily commute. This is not something, it's so many connections for Slovaks related to Hungary. They were those who bought the houses in the neighboring regions. And now borders were closed. How you commute to your work? What it makes sense if you can come from Rijeka to Bratislava or from Senec to Bratislava, and you close the border. It's a pencil line on a piece of paper, and we close it for no reasons. So if there is one lesson, we would need more EU. Now we see it in vaccination protocols, certificates. Now we see it on the vaccination strategy. Now we see it on so many other things. If EU has got competence in that area, it would be, I think, much earlier and much more efficiently handled before. And now we got those nationalists who were in the haste locking everything down, blaming EU that it was not efficient in handling the crisis. But we are blaming EU for something which in what EU has got no competence almost at all. This is like you're blaming a handicapped guy on a wheelchair that is not running properly on a marathon run. It's completely senseless. So I think that was a very good point. Thank you, Katalin, for that. There is lessons taken that this closed-minded nationalistic approach doesn't help. Rather, it's break. Thank you.
Thank you. Mischa, would you like to add something to this point?
Yeah. Well, during the ambassador's intervention, I was just thinking about one point he made about, disagreements within the alliance. And, there are, I think, two types of disagreements, and one is good and productive and normal. Like might disagree on, whatever, climate policy. We could disagree on, certain economic policies. This is like a normal discourse and dialogue that is done between countries all the time. And if you sit in a room with skilled diplomats with this like one goal to solve this thing and to create or try to create a joint position, a compromise that we can push forward together, this is like super healthy. But I feel that the differences and the problems of the V4 lie elsewhere. And for that, the perfect example is the letter Mr. Orbán drafted to Mikuláš Dzurinda a few days ago, when he basically issued this like very long finger wagging statement that like, why are you working against your own interests? You don't understand what's going on in the world? I mean, it's such a derogatory and such a diminishing way of treating like a senior official of a partner country. And it's very crystal clear that if Orbán wanted to convince Dzurinda to work together with him, he wouldn't have chosen this way. This is very clearly a show of sight that this platform currently is hijacked by two illiberal leaders who only want to use it as an occasion to show how strong they are in the European sphere. And it is, I suppose it's quite obvious that it can be an annoyance, a nuisance to those Czech or Slovak leaders who just want a good alliance to push for their regional interests elsewhere. And this is where if we continue to go in this direction, it will be quite obvious that these alternative alliances will multiply. Because of course, these countries are small. We are small, and we need partners. Isolation is only favored by those who prefer to have invisible enemies and fight against them, but who want to actually conduct like real diplomacy. As a small country, you need friends. You don't, and this is not where the V4 is currently heading. However, if I can give a good example, I think what happens at the so-called Alliance of Free Cities is a very, very good example of good diplomacy coming from the region. Mayors of Budapest, Bratislava, Prague, and Warsaw, alongside many other cities, they conduct very good and very strong public sphere diplomacy for the sake of their own communities. So there are like a lot of things to work together on. And this is why I'm hopeful that if next year at the Hungarian elections, there will be a change of winds and the united opposition will overcome, then we can actually revitalize the V4 cooperation, which has a lot of potential if it is done at a mutually agreed upon and partnership-based line. Because I don't want to get rid of the V4. I think it would be a huge disaster if the V4 collapsed. The V4 has a future, but it has to be reformed and it has to be focused once again on European integration and not on the demolishment of the European project.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Przybylski.
Yeah, I fully support and strongly underline this last stones also by Kathleen on the need to reform. It's not about reforming the V4. If we remember the words of Mr. Ambassador, this is not anything like an institution to reform. It is a club, and the reform to be done is in our individual countries. I speak for myself. Poland is in need of reforming its foreign policy, without which internally the V4 will be hampered. It will be the V4 who is on the wheelchair rather than the EU. I don't think this metaphor was applying that much to the question of the EU. We're missing a potential as a club, as a group, in reaching more and further, as with the innovation, with the skills, and with various positive things that are happening in the region. Just to give you one example, you were asking earlier about COVID response of V4. One of the great things that happened during this time that was not used or even wasn't immediately picked up across the EU was what the V4 countries on the administrative level started to do. They established contact points to share data about their policies, about their numbers, to try to coordinate on the response towards the pandemic. And that's it's like you can treat it as a startup innovation on the field of administration that could flourish, that could be only quickly and better applied across the EU should the V4 had this potential. But unfortunately, it is being wasted. It is being wasted because of our internal directions of a particular nationalist agenda that hijacked V4 and has no place actually in the origins of the whole idea about this cooperation.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Kovarik, yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, a couple of points I would like to react to. Well, first of all, just let me appreciate, because the case of Verbětice was mentioned, and I think also when we speak about other issues related to COVID pandemic, let me appreciate the show of solidarity and support from our partners in I think it was very important, and I think it was much appreciated. Especially when the Czech Republic sort of entered the hot phase of diplomatic battle with Russia. I think the support from other member states in the V4, but in the EU, was much appreciated. And I'm aware, Kathleen, of the differences we have between governments in Budapest and the remaining countries. But I think in general, also I know that the people in the countries were very much supportive to the Czech people, and I think this is something that has to be mentioned, and I don't think we can thank enough. In terms of the V4 as sort of a forum, I agree. I think let's say the idea of the forum is very simple. It's just to discuss and cooperate. But the forum is as strong, as relevant, and as good as its respective members. And I think this is something that has to be said as well. And I think as I think Wojciech mentioned, the work on the V4 has to start at home, and then I think we can bring the positive side to the forum itself. And I think this could be also one of the maybe common policy goals in terms of V4. It's actually to see whether we can introduce, for example, on the EU level, some positive policy agenda, because this is something that is very often discussed in the European level, and the V4 being seen as a bloc, maybe sometimes more rejecting issues than helping issues. Sometimes rightly, sometimes maybe not that so. But I think the ambition should be definitely to use the strength of the alliance to bring positive issues to the agenda of the EU. Because I think we have very good examples in our countries, which we can actually bring forward to the European level and show examples. And I think we can all think of relevant points from our respective member states. So I think that would be great ambition actually to have, and something to show that the V4 as a format has also its sort of a positive side, and has something to offer, and also maybe to sort of extend on the European level or even higher. And I think in some areas we are in a very good position to do so. So I think that could be some of the sort of recommendations and conclusions of our discussion, to see what actually could be the value added in positive terms of V4. Because I agree, and I think we would all agree that it would be a pity to dismantle V4 as a format, just because of the fact that at some point some of its members are not following the path that we would wish for. But at the same time, and we also know from the past that the V4 had its highs and lows. Mečiar government was mentioned in Slovakia. I know from past that, for example, the previous Czech president Václav Klaus was not very much big fan of a cooperation in the V4 format, and then it's changed again. So there are highs and lows, and I think we should sort of try to focus and to bring V4 up to its next high again.
And one technical point I would like to add, I would like to remind the audience if they have any questions, then please just leave them in the comments. Ms. Chair already talked about the upcoming elections in Hungary, and I would like to ask Mr. Kovařík if he could elaborate on the upcoming elections in the Czech Republic, if it would have any effect on the V4 cooperation.
Yeah, well, we have general elections at the beginning of October, and then you can already see it across the Czech Republic. The campaign is going on, but I think if we look at it from the V4 perspective, to me, the V4 format seems to be a little bit how to put it, maybe politically neutral, so sort of by its nature. For example, when I'm not sure if it's exactly the case right now, but if you look at a couple of years back, when so we had, for example, when I look at it from the perspective of European Parliament, we had social democratic government in Slovakia, we had conservative government in Poland, we had government in Hungary, which was at that time part of EPP. And we had liberal government in the Czech Republic. And so 4 different political groups in terms of how the European Parliament is composed, but still the ministers, the prime ministers were able to speak to each other. And we saw that also in the past. So I think in terms of V4 as a forum, and when I look at the key political forces in the Czech Republic, I think they all sort of endorse and acknowledge the importance of V4 as a regional format. Obviously, there could be differences, for example, on which topics the V4 format should be more vocal or not, where the cooperation maybe should be more intense, and on maybe on which points we should cooperate with some other member states, for instance. But I think if I can compare it, for example, to the extremely great relations we still have with the Slovak Republic, and we see the new prime ministers and ministers and presidents' first visit going to the neighboring country. I think it's in a very similar term also with the V4 format. So sort of regardless the political side for the government, the V4 format is always there. So I wouldn't expect very much a change of the approach to the forum as it is, but definitely there may be some for example divergences in the content, also based on policy priorities of the next government. But that I think is something that comes up usually after the elections in every member state of the forum.
Thank you. Now the V4 countries are on their way to rebuilding their economies, and I would like to ask Mr. Peric, what would be your economic forecast for the V4 countries regarding their recoveries after the COVID crisis?
Yeah, well, like Mr. Kovařík just now said regarding V4, it's actually basic intent of these countries is to expand and build their economies. So the growth of in V4, when we check now regarding this COVID-19 pandemics, well, in my own opinion, it should rebound solidly. Because if we check last year, how it went through, so the performance of the V4 countries during 2020, it was much better than anybody expected. So everybody expected the results would be much worse than it actually happened. It's basically up to V4 countries how they use the resources. And there are two main resources to be used. It's International Visegrad Fund and also the Next Generation EU Fund. But I'm positively sure that recovery should be better as it was last year. So I think it will be probably better than that anybody else is expecting to be.
Thank you. I would have an open question to our speakers. Do you think the public is sufficiently informed about the V4 activities and its importance? And how
can I first answer it since I'm already online? So actually, no. And I'm not sure about, let's say, countries in Czech or in Poland, but I can say it from point of view as a Croatian citizen. So in Croatia, there is actually none news, nothing about V4 countries. It was like a few years back when we had a female president. She was trying to do some organization, but in reality, and when I asked my friends in Slovakia and also in Hungary, normal people doesn't know so much regarding V4 countries.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. So I would also believe that the public could be better informed. But actually what I'm really worried about is that a great part of Europeans who know about the V4's activities, they only learn about a negative agenda. And, you know, that they are the guys who veto. And they are the guys who block everything. And they are the guys who are against like whatever European project is out there. They have some problems with it. They are the guys who have problems with the gender. They are the guys who have problems with the rule of law. And this is like such a horrible generalization because it's completely not true. At least, as I said, at least half of the Visegrad countries are absolutely like not in these cycles. However, they are just like merged together with this illiberal duo. And I would be so happy to see what Ondrej mentioned, that we have a strong positive agenda and we champion that. And we show to the world that what else this region could offer to Europe. We have like, you know, such a cultural wealth. We have such a rich history, amazing food, a lot of, you know, opportunities to travel and all that. And we could enrich this European community so much with our unique experiences. And it's really, really bad that really the first thing that comes to the political people's mind if they talk about Visegrad is illiberalism. It is so unjustified. And this is why I'm hoping that we could turn towards this agenda that Ondrej so very nicely worded, that we need to be the drivers of something more and something better and not something less and something, you know, more full of fights and tension. We are underrated, and let's change this.
Thank you. Mr. Kaczer, please.
You know, here I'll be rebellious again as usual. I think V4 is quite well done. In Slovakia, for sure, and if you look at the news or public, even I think it's getting overrated. As many times as it's mentioned or spoken of Visegrad, I think it's well-known format. Even with a hint of underrating, it's often portrayed as something as a miraculous cooperation instrument out there, so often mentioned in a positive connotation. But here I would say it's a duality of that, and precisely I want to come where Katalin was at, that among the key allies, Visegrad became in the last, say, 3 years, plus minus 3 years, it became so popular as about hemorrhoids are popular, you know, so it's becoming a symbol of rebellion, of a kind of a different take on Europe, as an alternative take and not very constructive take, because I absolutely would agree with Katalin that you may have conflict, you may have different views. It's completely healthy. It's normal in a human-to-human relationship. It's absolutely normal in politics. It's healthy. Actually, conflict is a driver of evolution, but it needs to be normal, constructive conflict. I've been married for 35 years, freshly divorced. I know what that means, how to handle the conflict, and I know what it means, what a pain it costs when you mishandle the conflict. And absolutely, as Andrzej was saying, the organizations not do have life of their own. They have only that much life, as much we put in it. It's about us, what we give it in that we then can expect getting out of that. So we have a contrasting image of Visegrad inside the Visegrad, of an overrated, miraculous institution, which is fighting for something as a crusade against for better Europe. And then with others looking at us and saying, Jesus Christ, what do they really want? Do they care? And and I think we should stop toying with this. We should be very careful about this. Because if Europe one day, maybe after COVID crisis, and God knows what comes out of the economic implications, etc., let us be positive on that. But if somebody comes with a new project saying Europe would need stronger, renewed take, or do we need those strange guys out there in Central Europe? Do we really need them in renewed Europe? And look, I was just now in Athens at a conference talking about Western Balkans as a paradigm of deeper or wider. And what we serve also to countries like in Western Balkans. I was saying we lose completely all the appeal. We lose that soft power which people liked about us. The way how we handle things, what was the nature of dialogue within the EU and future of EU. And we think that Visegrad is doing great things for Western Balkans, and we are often only ruining their illusions. And the light at the end of the tunnel now looks more like a train approaching our face rather than something light for inspiration. Well, I'm sorry about that.
Yes, please, Mr. Krivitsky.
On that tone, especially on the future of Europe, I mean, we are now at the beginnings of this conference on the future of Europe, and some say you never know what this animal will be. Maybe it's just the bureaucratic process isn't worth our time. On the other hand, some say it may be a door opener for the future, for the future construction of Europe, including opening the treaties, reshaping, reshuffling. And I think the time is now exactly for Central Europe, but I don't mean here the Central European governments. For the Central Europeans as societies, especially civil societies, that this process is an enabler and a unique opportunity also to take the stance in opposition to the negative trends or the negativity about the region itself. I mean, we need voices from Central Eastern Europe on the future of Europe. And these voices need to be structured, cleared, manifested. And I mean, I'm basically telling you what we are doing on our part in Visegrad. We're just beginning a civil society influencer scenario building, a kind of foresight exercise with leaders of civil society to plug into the Conference of Europe with a shadow report on what the civil society has to say. Because unless we really, and then collectively in a much bigger scale and multiplied many other times, do that in taking these opportunities right now, like the conference gives us, then the voice of Central Europe will not only be as it is, it will only deepen. I mean, we already are having a plan by the colleagues in the governments in Budapest and in Warsaw, a plan to overturn the narrative of Central Europe or to deepen it. I'll tell you what it is. It is about Slavs as, Slavic people in opposition to Germanic and whatever. What's the Slavic originality? These are the themes of the leading voices from the governments. How bizarre that sounds. I see by your faces. And we simply cannot allow that. I mean, because on the narrative level, this is harming. If you look at the Eurobarometer surveys, even this is harming majority of the populations that trust in the EU institutions. Even more than 50%, much more than 50%, want European solutions to the common problems, and they need to speak out. So this is the challenge, I would see, for the Visegrad cooperation, and especially in the sense that this is not only governmental format. And I want to underline it here, because Visegrad Group, I mean, especially after 30 years, is much more than elite projects of couple of guys in 4 capitals. This is now, by now, it's a generation. It's an investment that generated, well, my generation, younger generation, that already think that Visegrad is theirs. And they are definitely non-governmental. They have their businesses, they have their civil society activism aside to that. And they need to come together and speak for the European project as a voice from Central Europe. I hope this is the future, and I do believe strongly that there are these voices that need to just be brought together, and the spotlight needs to be on them.
Mr. Kratcher, would you like to react to these points?
Yeah, well, I would like to react for what Wojciech was saying. You know, in the years ago, I try to say that Visegrad should go by positive example to the rest of the Europe in unfinished European business. I'll give you a concrete example. We should have taken issues in which EU was not finished, say as a single market area. I was always frustrated for me. Why, you know, I pick my cell phone, turn it on. Why it's, O2 CZ. Why it's not O2 EU? You know why? And if it's not working on the all level of EU and it's all of that stupid roaming, which was finally solved, I'm saying about the proposals of years ago, I said, okay, if EU is not able to overcome those issues or it takes time, why could not we within V4 go by an example and create or enable things like telecom communication, like digital roaming, like some of the services. Why, if I want to buy a new car or and want to have a good insurance, why wouldn't we open complete competition within Visegrad if Europe is not ready to open it? And I would call, you know, I get a quote from Graz, or I would get a quote from Krakow or Budapest for my car insurance. And it does not matter. Why on banking? I know, okay, EU monetary union, here there is some speed limitation for those who are not. But I'm just picking on some of the examples where Visegrad should not go by a destructive example of showing the, kind of a wish for the old way of life it used to be in the 13th century of Europe, but turn into unfinished business of Europe, where we would show how progressive we can be. The COVID was also a good example, not to close the borders, but apply very regional approach. If there is a red lines cross that door, let's close the circle around here in 30 kilometers, but not close the border and let people from Rijeka move freely, you know, et cetera, et cetera. This could apply also in the Czech-Slovak border, Polish-Slovak borders, et cetera, et cetera. So we got a daily whole array of examples where Visegrad can turn very practical, can go by example to the rest of Europe, and also show its own citizens that here is an impact. Not only that you talk, have a great mythological, philosophical thoughts, but be very practical and say, we do something which is helping you in your daily life. And these borders here are, it's a pencil thing. But the system is open for you, but we haven't done so. We are more and more rather closing and having a big speeches and big talks. We should turn Visegrad into an example to other Europeans, how we can do things better, more efficiently, better for people and better for Europe.
Yes, please, Mr. Kovacic.
Thank you, and I'll be extremely short because I would have to switch to another meeting in a bit. I'm sorry for that, but I fully agree, and I think this is sort of a go in line, which I mentioned in my previous intervention. At the beginning, you asked about whether the public is informed. Maybe you would use another word. I think there's a broad awareness about the V4 in the countries. Maybe not in-depth information about it, but I think that there's a good awareness, and also I think to a certain extent there is increasing awareness of the V4 countries across the EU, but to a certain extent linked to the fact, and that I think was mentioned by previous speakers, this sort of controversy of very positive image in the countries and a rather negative image outside of the countries. And I think this sort of dichotomy and tension should be overcome, not to switch it, but change it to positive and positive. And I think this is something that was sort of, I think, also in line of the debate of previous speakers. Maybe just completing on what Wojciech had to say. I think this is exactly also why Visegrad Fund was created some 20 years ago, to support civil society, to support soft projects between the countries, and also, and it was not only sponsored by countries from the V4 countries, but also from other parts of the world. And I think this is exactly a tool that may find it's good use in these times. And I cannot agree more with Ambassador Kacher on, for example, the issue of single market. This is an absolute necessity for all V4 countries. I look at the Czech Republic. 84% of exports go to the EU. 84% of export. We are basically attached to the single market, and it's the same for other countries. And we saw what happened during the pandemic when the borders were shut. What happened to the businesses? What happened to people? What happened to everything? It was mentioned, I haven't seen my Slovak part of family since August last year. So this is exactly, and I think there are other examples like digitalization, maybe even some security issues like cybersecurity, for example. And so I think there are, and we don't have to be the avant-garde and the forefront for every single policy. I mean, maybe there are some exceptions in Europe, but all the countries are specialized or good at something, and I think we also have these special competence in V4, and this should be something we should promote, and this should be something we should put forward, because this is something that can actually help to sort of fulfill the ambition of making V4 more positive forum. And if you allow me on this note, I would have to apologize and go to another meeting.
Thank you very much.
Sorry for that. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. I would like to thank our speakers, Katalin Cseh, Andrzej Kovarik, József Peric, Ambassador Rostislav Kacher, and last but not least, Wojciech Przybylski, for joining us today. Thank you very much. And thank you to the audience as well for having tuned in for this afternoon. And if you enjoyed the discussion, please follow us on social media. Thank you much again, and have a great evening. Goodbye.
Thank you. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.